This video is sponsored by Squarespace. You know that thin, glossy layer that's on the surface of some brownies? Particularly the ones you bake from a box. What is that shiny skin? And how do you make sure that your brownie recipe will have it? You and me, we're going to answer both of those questions definitively, though today we're just focusing on the first one. What exactly is the skin? Yes, Ragusia is doing a two-parter on brownie skin. Buckle up. This is Dr. Pia Sorensen, co-author of the new book Science and Cooking: Physics Meets Food, From Homemade to Haute Cuisine. She holds a PhD in chemical biology from Harvard, where she teaches a science of cooking class. Yes, I called Harvard about brownie skin.
I love that skin as well. So I think it's a great question to ask. What I think it might be is that on top you have a little bit of a foamy layer that is basically air bubbles that are suspended in liquid batter. And that liquid consists of some egg, and it also probably consists of some sugar, which is dissolved in the liquid. And so what I'm guessing is up there is some foam, air, some egg, some sugar, and maybe a little bit less of the flour and the starch.
Dr. Sorensen suspects that some of the flour, the starch particles, are maybe sinking to the bottom of the batter in the oven, and what's left on top is basically a dome of meringue, sweetened egg foam. This is what I would call one of the three dominant brownie skin hypotheses that you will find on the internet. Most people writing about it call it a crust, and I admit that crust is more appetizing, but when I put the microscope camera on it, you can see how thin it is. I think skin is more apt. Anyway, the three dominant hypotheses. Number one, the cocoa butter hypothesis. People who say you get a shiny crust if you use lots of solid chocolate containing cocoa fat in your batter. There is the sugar dissolution hypothesis. People who say it's all about whether your sugar is fully dissolved into the aqueous phase of the batter. And then there's the meringue hypothesis. Lots of people say the trick to getting that skin is to beat the batter really thoroughly, or even to beat the eggs and sugar alone to create an egg foam. And maybe that does work, or can work, but it doesn't answer the question we're trying to answer today, which is, what is the skin? Just because mixing the batter thoroughly might help to get the skin doesn't necessarily mean that skin is meringue. Now, the scientific powers that be think they have more important things to dedicate their awesome laboratory capacity to than investigating brownie skin composition. Whatever. Dr. Sorensen is going to help us figure this out for ourselves.
If you were to then take some of that crust, dissolve it in water, and then think of a way to measure the sugar concentration. Is the sugar concentration higher than it is in the rest of the batter? That would prove if the sugar is there.
So we're gonna need some samples to analyze. This right here is my favorite brownie mix from a box. Like most box mixes, it gets you great skin. And the first reason I'm skeptical of the cocoa butter hypothesis is there's no cocoa fat in here. It's just dry cocoa powder. The fats are from the egg yolk and the vegetable oil that you mix into the water, and then there's a little bit of soybean oil already in the box mix. One reason that baked from a box stuff comes out a little bit different is that the processors use kind of fancy technology to individually coat all of the particles of flour and such in fat. You can see that by grabbing the mix and squeezing it. See how it holds its shape? Flour doesn't do that normally. That's because each particle here is a little bit greasy. Coating the flour in fat helps it to emulsify or mix better into the batter, and it allows the finished brownie or cake or whatever to hold a little bit more oil and water in itself. For more about that, see my video about boxed cake mixes, linked in the description. Anyway, I baked 2 batches of this box mix, and then it was time to harvest the skin. This was easily one of the craziest things I've done in my entire life. It took hours. The problem is that most of the skin is stuck to the brownie underneath. We'll call it the brownie guts. You can tell that when the brownie bakes, the skin forms pretty quickly and then it puffs up like a balloon, separating from the guts and then floating atop a layer of steam or other gas. As it settles back down, most of it readheres to the guts. Only a few patches like this remain, wrinkles where the balloon did not settle smoothly. Those are really the only places where you can harvest pure skin. See a little bit like that? That's got some guts stuck to the bottom, so it's no good as a sample, and the skin is far too delicate to scrape clean. It is gossamer thin, which means there simply isn't much of it in terms of mass. I quickly realized I was going to need to bake more boxes, 6 in all. Why? Well, when you're doing chemistry at home, you're using relatively crude equipment and methods, and it's hard to accurately measure out very, very small quantities. Like if you accidentally measure out 0.03 grams of something instead of 0.02 grams of it, you will have just inflated your results by 50%. So to get more accurate results, you gotta work at a pretty big physical scale. I needed lots of skin. It's kind of like getting a sufficient sample size in statistics. Like if I were to drop dead right now and I was the only case in your sample size of 1, your data would indicate that the fatality rate of making videos about brownie skin is 100%. It's a death sentence! Don't do it! The bigger the sample size, the more you neutralize the influence of random chance. So again, more skin. From 6 boxes, I harvested a whopping 6 grams of pure, unadulterated, fair trade brownie skin. Street value undetermined. Now we're also going to need a sample of the brownie guts to compare with. I thought the solid chocolate chips inside might be a confounding variable, so I picked them out. Those guts are so wet, we're going to need to dry them before we can analyze them. A way they dry soil samples and such in a laboratory is in basically a very low convection oven, like 60 C, 140 Fahrenheit. 170 is the best I can do in my oven. You want a temperature that'll drive off the water without causing any other chemical changes in the sample. Now that it's dried a bit, I'm going to spin it in my coffee grinder, which I have of course cleaned thoroughly. Smaller particle size means more surface area for evaporation, and we can get it even drier. I'm going to dry both the guts and the skin samples overnight. The skin is obviously much drier to start with, and we need to equalize the water content to analyze them. We don't really have a good way of accurately measuring the water content of the samples, so in order to get them both to the same water content, what we need to do is get it to 0, right? Or as close to 0 as possible. Totally dry it out. Here they are the next day, and it's time to pulverize them some more. We're going to dissolve these into solutions, and they'll dissolve much quicker and more evenly if they're blasted into powders. Nobody sneeze! Now, to figure out what's in there chemically, we're going to need some tools.
So there are various sort of home test ways to test sugar concentrations. One of them is to use like a glucose meter that diabetics use. You would have to probably do a series of dilutions to get to a concentration that they would pick up on, I think. I'm not sure.
Problem with that is those are generally made to measure glucose specifically, and there's other kinds of simple sugars in baked goods, notably sucrose, table sugar. So another option would be this. This is a Brix refractometer, specifically one that is made for home brewers and winemakers. I got it for 18 bucks on Amazon. Brix is a unit of measurement. Strictly speaking, 1 degree of Brix is 1 gram of sucrose dissolved into 100 grams of water, though this will spot other sugars as well. Simple carbohydrates as opposed to more complex carbohydrates, starches. Homebrewers use these to see how much of their grains have been broken down into sugars, and then in turn how much of the sugar has been metabolized by yeast into alcohol. And as such, these are designed to read sugar concentrations that are within the range that you would typically encounter in that pursuit, namely 0 to 30 Brix. So we're gonna have to make sure that our solution is diluted down into that range. I'm using a straw to very delicately shovel my desiccated brownie guts powder into a little beaker, and I'm measuring out 2 grams. Normal kitchen scales, by the way, in my experience, often struggle to accurately measure differences of just 1 or 2 grams, and they might not even try to measure differences of fractions of a gram. So for that, you're gonna need something else. There are cheap ones that you can buy, like this one. They're often made for measuring jewelry, or in this case, it's just aimed at like dieters, so it's for portioning out very, very small differences of food. I got it at Walmart for 20 bucks, and I'm using a pipette that came with my refractometer to measure out 4 grams of water. Distilled water from the grocery store, just to be safe. Now, even if my brownie was 100% sugar, I can be assured that it'll be down to the 0 to 30 range that this thing is built to detect. I'll stir that up with a clean skewer. They use a glass stirring rod for this in a lab. Then I'll deposit a few drops onto the refractometer. You lay over what is called the daylight plate. It presses the sample flat, and then you hold it up to light and you look inside. The device uses a prism to detect the degree to which the sample changes the direction or refracts light. What you see inside the eyepiece is just a simple meter. It looks like this. Based on the refraction, it can tell how much sugar is in the solution. Brownie gut sample number 1 reads 20 Brix at 2 to 1 skin dilution. Since very subtle mistakes in measurement could throw off a number like that, what we got to do is repeat the experiment. I did several more readings with that sample, and then I mixed up another sample, guts too, virtually the same result. Now, if we're testing the meringue hypothesis, another thing we might want to know is protein content, right? Meringues are stabilized with egg protein. So is there a way to measure protein at home?
What about these sticks? You know, I don't know if you know anyone on the keto diet. Sticks like that would basically measure protein in urine.
$22 on Amazon, a urine protein refractometer. To get our brownie sample into the range this is designed to detect, we have to dilute it way more, 4 grams of water to 1 gram brownie guts, and 7.5 grams of protein per 100 milliliters of liquid is the unit this thing shows us. A similar reading when I mixed a second solution, so that's good. But while those numbers might be proportionally right relative to each other, Dr. Sorensen cautions that they might not be, right, because refractometers are built to measure certain specific liquids. In this case, urine, not brownie dissolved in water. We don't need a scientist to tell us that light passes differently through urine than it does through brownie guts. Indeed, I also bought a salinity refractometer, and it showed all of my brownie samples as being off the scale salty, which can't possibly be right. This is aimed at people keeping fish tanks, and that's just a very different kind of liquid that it's built to analyze. So the protein and sugar numbers might not be right, but we can be reasonably assured they'll be wrong to exactly the same degree with our other sample, the brownie skin sample. We don't need to know the precise sugar and protein content here. We're not calculating nutritional data, thank God. All we need to know is whether the protein and sugar is higher in the skin than it is in the guts. And across repeated tests with multiple dilutions of the skin, we see that the sugar and protein content of the skin does seem to be a little bit higher. But such a minor difference could easily be explained by simple measurement error. I'm doing science with a bendy straw. This isn't exactly CSI Special Pastries unit. It could also be that I failed to get my brownie guts all the way dry. After all, it did start off much wetter than the skin. And if there's any water content at all in one of the samples, then any solution made with that sample is going to be that much less concentrated, right? So I dried both of my samples overnight again, I tested them again this morning, and indeed, I got virtually identical results between the guts and the skin. These results are hardly fit for publication in a scholarly journal, but I and Dr. Sorensen are convinced, reasonably convinced, that brownie skin and brownie guts are simply different states of the same matter. The skin is not something that's separating out of the batter solution and rising to the top. If the flour, the starch, was settling to the bottom of the batter a little bit, we would expect to see the other major constituents of the batter overrepresented proportionally in the skin, and they're just not. The skin is no more meringue than the rest of the brownie is. It looks to be all the same stuff. So why does it look so different? Why is it shiny? Well, probably because it's smooth. If we turn the brownie around and we look at the underside where it was smoothed out against the pan surface, it's pretty shiny there too. This is literally what gloss means in optics. When something is very, very smooth, light will reflect off of it very directly. If it's rough, light will get in there and bounce around in a million different directions. What seems to be happening here is gas is building inside the batter as it bakes, stretching the surface into a taut, smooth membrane, like a balloon. With this batter, you can see it happen after like 5 minutes.
That makes me think that that's enough time to have a little bit of water evaporate right on the surface so that it's no longer like a super thin liquid. It's a little bit more viscous. And that at some, that is sort of enough for it to be cohesive.
To contain the steam or other gas underneath it. If it was too loose, it just wouldn't be able to hold the bubble at all. And if it was too hard, it wouldn't be able to expand. It wouldn't be pliable. It would just break and pop.
And I think for that to happen, you have to have some evaporation. But you also need to have the right composition of whatever egg and sugar. And the sugar is going to contribute the viscosity. And the egg is sort of going to capture it. Right? That's going to congeal and denature as you heat it. So it seems like there's some balance between that.
And what combination of ingredients gets you that magic consistency that results in the skin? Well, we're gonna have to bake like 50 more pans of brownies to find out, but we're gonna do it. I swear we'll figure out exactly how you get scratch-baked brownies as shiny as a new website from Squarespace. Dozens and dozens of high-gloss templates await you. Now you can sort them by type, online store, personal portfolio, and or by topic, food. And because the templates are very image-based, all you gotta do is upload a picture or two of your own, and the design immediately looks like yours, though you can play around with fonts and colors and such. It takes literally minutes to throw something like this together for free over at squarespace.com. When you're ready to do anything more advanced, take reservations, take people's money, post members-only content to your site, let people book appointments with you, Squarespace has everything you need. They host your site for you, they can register your domain for you, and when you've picked one, or you're ready to pay to take your site live, you can do us both a favor and save 10% at squarespace.com/Ragusia. Link and code are in the description. Thank you, Squarespace. And thank you, Dr. Sorensen. We'll see you in part 2.
It's a series. Okay, cool. A brownie series.
Don't mock me, Dr. Harvard. Brownie skin is important.